Hello ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back into the studio. This week's video is an excerpt from one of my Patreon exclusive videos. This is from the 4th episode in the portrait series, where we finish the skull. If you want to support the channel and watch the full video, head over to patreon.com/Eirik Arnesen. You'll find the link in the video description below. Enjoy the video. According to my YouTube analytics, over 75% of you watching this are not subscribed to the channel. If you enjoy my content, want to support the channel and get the most recent upload in your feed so you don't miss it, subscribe to the channel by hitting the little red subscribe button on the bottom right hand side of the video. It's free for you and it helps me out a lot. The tools of the trade for this stage in the process are the same as they have been for the entire video series, and as far as I can see it, the same tools you'll see again and again in future videos. I have no intentions of changing my tool collection around. I have 3 different types of tools that I use: the wooden modeling tool for applying clay, the rake tool for removing clay, and the loop tool for smoothing clay. The wooden modeling tool is featuring heavily in this video, as you can probably see, because there's a lot of surface to unify and a lot of holes to fill in the clay. The loosely applied pieces that make up the block-in of this sculpture, or any of my sculptures for that matter, have high points that are carefully considered, and so it would be a mistake to remove clay while attempting to finish the surface, as this would compromise previously made decisions. And we spoke about that earlier today and in previous videos as well. Applying clay and leveling out the surface using these clay notes as the outer limits of where I'll add clay is a more productive approach, one that requires the least amount of back and forth. The rake tools I use are from Sculpture House, and in this video they won't feature very prominently because hopefully there's not going to be a lot of clay to remove. The rake tool is a quick way to bring a rough surface together a bit, but it's not a finishing tool for me. I use it a lot during the process, as it helps clarify the image a lot without a lot of effort, help contains the mess or clean the mess if you will. Today it's not going to be the most useful, however. Some people like the surface texture the rake leaves, and perhaps I'll let some of that texture sneak in here and there, but in my work, rake tool texture doesn't feature very heavily, at least not for now. The rake tool will be used sparingly. I do at some point in this video turn the tool around, however, and use the side without the teeth as kind of a large loop tool to lightly dampen down some of the wood tool texture that gets left when I apply the clay. So you'll certainly see it used, but not in the same fashion that we have used it in previous videos. The loop tools I use are from Kemper Tools, and you'll see me use these for mainly 2 purposes in this video. One is taking down the tool marks from the wood tool that sometimes get left behind when I apply the clay. The loop tool lightly gliding over the surface, and it works essentially like fine sandpaper on wood. It takes off some of the roughness while not severely altering the texture. It just lowers the volume of the texture a little bit. The second way it's used is in places where the wooden modeling tool cannot easily go. The wood tools have an easy time dealing with convex shapes, so the broad forms of the forehead are easily handled with the wood tool, for example. However, when we get into concave shapes, we'll need the loop tool in order to reach in there, to get in there. On the human body, there are 2 major areas you'll almost certainly will need a loop tool for, and that's around the neck and the clavicles, and around the Achilles tendon of the ankle. Those are concave areas. I'm sure there are plenty more, but these 2 stand out and comes to mind instantly. Here on the skull, we have a hard time dealing with the teeth without a loop tool, for example, and there are plenty of other concave shapes around the bottom of the cheekbones that having a loop tool for is going to make life much easier for us. While we are on the topic of tools, a major thing to keep in mind while attempting to create a surface similar to this, which is of course very fragile, fairly fragile anyway, is keeping your tools clean. As you work with water-based clay and tools, the clay will build up on the tool, and the clay dries out, and eventually you'll have a loop tool, for example, which is no longer a smooth metal wire. It's a jagged wire that leaves scrape marks. This makes it, of course, incredibly difficult to create a refined surface. You'll probably see in the video that sometimes I put the tool between my fingers in order to clean it, or the tool disappears off screen before it comes back pretty quickly. That's probably because I'm cleaning the tool. There are many ways of going about cleaning your tool. For the loops and rakes, I just personally use my fingers or two tools together. If the clay is really stuck on there, I'll take a second tool and use it to scrape the dry clay off. For the wood tool, I use a clean loop tool and scrape the clay off. You can also have a moist sponge on your sculpting stand and use that to help clean the clay off. Some people have a rag, some people have a little cup of water that they dip their tools into. Personally, I keep it simple and use my hands or another tool to clean off the old and dried clay with. But it is very important. Keep your tools clean. Before we get into speaking about actual clay application techniques, which you have already seen, but I'll explain the procedure as well, before that, let me mention a particular line of thinking which I believe is quite useful. I don't have very many tools that I use, as you can see. I have 3 different categories of tools, and then sets of different sizes within those 3 categories. My large wood tool, for example, is the same shape as my small wood tool. All my rakes and loops have the wire mostly in the same shape, or at least a very similar shape. I think that's useful because it keeps things simple. You get better at mastering the particulars of a certain shape of tool instead of jumping between a ton of different ones. You save time by not switching tools also, though this might be a little bit of a less important consideration. For the wood tool, this shape is kind of like the back of a pretty flat and slightly pointed spoon with rounded edges. The rounded edges are very important and a personal modification I did when I bought the tool. It keeps the tool from having the edge dig into the clay when I roll the tool over, which would leave a sharp line, a mark on the surface of my sculpture. But rounding that edge off with some sandpaper solves this issue pretty easily. So be prepared to sometimes customize your tool to work with you and whatever you might need when you buy mass-produced tools. For the loops and rakes, they all have a round side, kind of like a half moon shape, I guess, and one side that looks like a half a triangle with a slightly rounded corners. The round side is more for really broad open areas, while the half triangle shape is for tighter turns. Having them all be the same shape helps with muscle memory and keeps things a little bit simpler for me. Another major plus in having the same tools in different sizes is that I can get the same effects at different scales. You'll see me use a larger wood tool to apply clay in some large open areas like the top of the skull. This speeds things up, of course, and gives a slight variety in the finished texture. One thing I really don't like is texture where there is a clear pattern and an obvious pattern. If there is a pattern, there needs to be some semblance of rhyme or reason to said patterns, or at least the pattern needs to be beautiful, like rake marks following the forms, for example. So I try to avoid that and do use the smaller tool even on larger areas here and there, so there's not a clear pattern that develops, with larger tool marks always appearing on larger, more open areas with a different set of tool marks in smaller, tighter areas. Unless it's intentional, we don't want the surface to feel manufactured. We want it to feel natural, or at least that's what I'm going for. So I have to be aware of repeating patterns in the texture and try not to create them. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, consider liking it and subscribing to the channel for more videos. I put out a new video every Thursday, so stay tuned for next week. If you want to support the channel, visit the link to my Patreon page in the description below the video to learn how. Until then, stay creative, and I hope to see you on the next one.